Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, we're going to start with a new feature that is in preview called Quick Recovery. So there was a blog that was published about a month ago now, and there's announcing it was a new feature in Windows to deploy targeted remediations to affected devices via Windows RE or recovery environment to automate fixes without any manual intervention from admins. So again, this is currently in preview. It is on Windows 11, 24H2 and up. And eventually the plan is to enable this by default for Windows 11 Home. And then for devices that are running Windows 11 Pro and Enterprise, local and IT admins will be able to have full control and enable different features and customize it to what they want for their organization. In this initial release, there's going to be a kind of three different things that you can focus on. One, you can enable or disable the quick recovery via the remote remediation CSP or directly on the device via the reagent c.exe in the administrative command prompt. So once you configure the experience, you can pre-populate network credentials to make sure that there's seamless delivery of the automatic remediations. You can also configure scanning intervals, which checks for remediations about, depending on whatever that time frame is. It could be like every 30 minutes. And then there's also a timeout that you can also configure, which determines when the device will restart to optimize that remediation process. And you can also test, so you can simulate a quick recovery process through test mode to make sure that the readiness before deployment is working correctly. So keep an eye out for the test remediation package that's coming. It should probably already be there, is my guess, because again, this was published back at the end of March. And so a couple of things on how it specifically works. I mean, when there's a widespread outage, the system has this quick recovery and automatic remediations enabled. It'll look a lot like this. So the device will enter recovery mode. So if it's a Windows 11 device, it encounters a critical failure during a normal boot, it enters Windows recovery environment. Network connection is established, so that's that thing that admins will pre-configure, and it'll connect to the network via Ethernet or Wi-Fi and ensure that the device can communicate with Microsoft's recovery service. And then Microsoft will analyze the crash data from the affected devices to identify patterns and pinpoint the root cause. And if there's a widespread outage detected, an internal response team is activated to develop, validate, and prepare a targeted remediation. And then in the initial release, Microsoft will deliver the remediation via Windows Update and adhere to the update policies configured on the device. You can test for this again in Windows Insider Preview Build in the beta channel for Windows 11 24H2. So pretty cool. Basically, if there's a widespread outage, we have an internal team that's going to check this, and then we roll out the automatic remediations. And if those devices in your organization have it enabled, it'll automatically do the remediation and then reboot based on your configurations.
Yeah, this is exciting. You have in the rundown here, Andy, it's another feature born from the CrowdStrike incident of last summer. Certainly, as I always say on this show, cybersecurity is a team sport. Rising tide lifts all ships. Enter your idiom of choice there. But the long story short is we all benefit from this. At the end of the day, this is technology that is really exciting. If a widespread outage were to occur that prevents Windows machines from booting normally in Windows 11 20H2, they will now eventually boot into this recovery environment. Windows RE is not new. It's been around for a very long time. This is just leveraging that technology to check periodically for a recovery package. It's a new delivery method for delivering some sort of package that's going to take some sort of action. And you can imagine in the CrowdStrike case, it would be delete the broken driver that prevented those systems from booting. And then after so long, they'll automatically reboot, preventing a scenario where you have to go manually touch every single device because it can't start up and you can't do remote remediation. Yay, this is awesome. So very exciting development. And really a theme that's going to persist throughout this show is finally delivering maybe finally is too strong a word, but delivering more enterprise value to really encourage enterprises to move to Windows 11 above and beyond just Windows 10 is going away, which should be motivation enough for anyone. But now you actually are getting some net new capabilities that enterprise and admins are going to really appreciate. Having this as a backstop in case something does go awry on your system is really a nice security blanket. And you can test it today, still in preview currently, but targeted for release in the near future. So certainly something to wrap your arms around, become familiar with, and be ready to leverage this day one in general availability. You certainly don't want to be the organization that encounters an issue that this could have saved you from had you configured and deployed it. So get out in front of it. Don't run into a scenario where you're kicking yourself saying, man, I wish I would have done my homework and gotten this turned on. This should be top of your list, and leapfrog everything else you're doing, and being ready for this to become generally available in the near future.
Yeah, and this is really following up on that initiative that was announced at Ignite that we really haven't touched on too much. We did mention it in our Ignite show back in November, but there was this Windows Resiliency Initiative that wanted to really focus on the things that happened during the CrowdStrike incident. So there are a couple things that were born out of that. The Windows Resiliency Initiative, the focus areas were like strengthening reliability based on the CrowdStrike incident, enabling more apps and users to run without admin privileges, stronger controls for apps and drivers that are allowed to run, and improving identity protection to prevent phishing attacks. And then there was also some stuff around the Microsoft Virus Initiative and how to deploy virus updates with safely. And so several things out of that incident, and we're constantly improving as an industry, not just as Microsoft, but as an industry. And so this is just something that I think is really good for the industry as a whole. Something happened. We're learning from it. We're trying to make sure that this type of event doesn't happen again.
That's a really good point. And by the way, you dropped a we, Andy, so a good opportunity for me to remind our listeners. Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales. Andy for the Microsoft Federal division, me for enterprise commercial. You brought up that resiliency initiative, and that was, if you said it was Ignite timeframe, that's literally November. So in the long history of Windows dating back to 1985, to recognize the need to develop something like this and to have it shipping in public preview 6 months later in Windows, which, love it or hate it, Windows is one of the most complex pieces of computer software ever written, is really incredible. And so my hat is off virtually to the Windows development team for bringing this to light so quickly and getting this out the door. And of course, we say this frequently, but we really mean it. We'll learn from feedback. We'll understand what are the pieces we're missing. What do enterprises need to deploy this at scale? Where do we go next? And we will use that feedback to prioritize development from here. But there's this concept of a minimum viable product where you get something that you can ship and you ship it. And then you learn and you iterate and you adapt. As a perfect reminder, the initial iPhone shipped without video recording or cut, copy, and paste or multitasking. So you start with something that's minimum viable and you build it over time. So if this does not meet your use case today, provide that feedback. Work with your customer success account manager. Provide a DCR, effectively a change request to the product group for what you would need to support it. So help us build this out and make sure it's ready to support every organization so no one has to go through the kind of remediation they did last July.
That's a really good call out. And that's something that I don't think that a lot of organizations know that they can do. And now actually working with DoD and the federal government, it's actually quite common for them to request a feature. Something of ours doesn't meet their needs, especially in the government cloud, especially in the DoD cloud and the secret cloud. There are things that take time to code and get to those areas, mainly because you have to hire US citizens and background checks and all that to even work in that environment. So it's actually a very difficult, it's a much smaller team to code in that environment, but they provide feedback to Microsoft all the time. And so highly encourage any organization, if something doesn't fit your needs, talk to the account team. You might just be a small organization, but maybe there's other small organizations that have that feature request that's out there. And eventually that might make it to the engineering team. And one of the engagements that I had back in the commercial space before I left for federal was, as a person in the field, I was talking to one of my customers. We were telling them about a product, Defender for Storage, which is about Defender for Cloud. And there was something in there that they asked about. And I said, well, that's not something that they have today. And so when I asked the distribution list, the engineering team said, hey, we are in the process of actually finding requirements and coding this. Like, we haven't started the code for it, but we would love to talk to your customer about it. And this is not a very big organization. I think they have maybe 4,000 people, but we were able to get their security engineer, the security manager, on a call with the Defender for Storage engineering team, including developers, product managers, and everything. And they told them what they were looking for. And it just added, kind of more color to that team. Because, to be honest, some of these product managers and engineers, they don't get out much, right? They don't know how it's actually used. They're like, hey, we have this idea and we want to code it in. But, the people, the operators, the people who are actually using the product, they have different ideas of how it's going to be used. And so that's a great way to provide feedback and maybe even get your feature coded in whatever product that we have.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's really a big part of how Microsoft works. And yes, sometimes it can be influenced by how big are you, how many seats are you, but they really do a good job of soliciting feedback across organizations of all sizes. I have certainly had product groups reach out and be like, we want to talk to your customer. And they're relatively large, 17,000 seats, but they're not a six-figure multinational customer. And I've had customers who are 1,000, 1,500 seats. And they're like, yeah, we were in the private preview for Copilot for security. And it's like, wow, really? Like, I'm kind of surprised by that, but they really do try to get out above and beyond just, massive multinational organizations, because they do recognize that the needs are different across different small, medium businesses, smaller enterprises, larger enterprises, strategic enterprises, and even, to Andy's point, the different governmental entities as well. So certainly they try to solicit all that feedback. So don't think your feedback doesn't matter. It does. And that's really a big part of how Microsoft develops product. Like you said, these program managers don't always get out much. They don't know the real world unless you tell them. And so this is how stuff gets done. Anyhow, quick recovery. Exciting. Give it a try. Give some feedback.
Another thing that was announced recently, also pretty cool, coming, is called Hotpatch. And so there was another blog that was more recent, probably in the last week or two, and it announced this new feature called Hotpatch, which is monthly security updates that get installed without having your users reboot the machine. And so some benefits are that the patches, once they're patched, they immediately take effect, so that you have a really rapid protection against vulnerabilities. The devices are receiving the same level of patching as the monthly standard security updates, which is on the Tuesday of every month. And so there's these hot patches, and then there's still the standard security patches, which may take updates, restarts in order to take effect. So the hot patches, much better. You don't require a restart, and your users can continue to work without interruptions. They're just going to get pushed out to the operating system. No interruptions to your users, no restart required. So in order to take advantage of Hotpatch, you have to create a quality update policy within Windows Autopatch in the Intune console. All eligible Windows 11 Enterprise version 24H2 devices that are managed by this policy will be offered the Hotpatch updates in a quarterly cycle. And so the Hotpatch updates follow the same deployment ring schedule as your standard updates, but they're done through quarterly management. So devices will receive the Hotpatch update. They'll also see a different KB number tracking the Hotpatch release, and a different OS version than the devices receiving the standard updates that require a restart. So they operate on a quarterly cycle. The cumulative baseline months in January, April, July, and October. The devices install the monthly fixed security updates, and they restart. So on those 4 months, every device, specifically the Hotpatch devices, they will get the full cumulative security patch and restart, just like on the first Tuesday of the month.
Second Tuesday of the month.
Second Tuesday of the month.
Yep.
Thank you.
Patch Tuesday.
And so these cumulative updates give security fixes, new features, enhancements, and everything. And then in the other 2 months, these devices will receive Hotpatch updates, which only include security updates and do not require a restart. And then those devices will catch up on features and enhancements in the quarterly cumulative update. So this reduces the number of restarts for Windows updates from 12 to just 4 per year with these planned Hotpatch updates. Now, some of the requirements for Hotpatch, you do have to have Windows 11 Enterprise, E3, E5, F3, Windows Education, A3, A5, or a Windows 365 Enterprise subscription. You also have to be running Windows 11 Enterprise version 24H2 with the current baseline update installed. 64 CPUs, including AMD 64 and Intel devices. ARM 64 devices are in preview. So your basic x64 CPU is included right now, with the other ones in preview. And then Intune has to manage policy for the Hotpatch updates with Hotpatch enabled Windows quality updates. And virtualization based security has to be enabled. Oh, that was a lot. So basically, again, this is something that you can take advantage of today if you are running the most current version of Windows 11. If you're on a regular 864, again, the ARM 64 devices are in preview, so you could still test it. Virtualization-based security, that one's an interesting one, but most devices these days, especially ones that have been deployed and not just upgraded, and if you're staying current, with Windows 11, VBS is enabled by default. So for the majority of devices, this is probably a moot point, but there are devices that have been upgraded through the years, maybe, that if you did upgrade, it didn't turn on automatically, or if you haven't enabled it by policy, or if you turn it off by policy specifically, this is something that does have to be enabled.
Very exciting. We go from 12 reboots a year down to 4. So that's a 66% reduction in reboots. Always nice when you can go out to your users and celebrate a win with them. Hey, we are going to do fewer forced reboots from now on. Everyone likes the sound of that. And security teams like the fact that protection's immediate, as opposed to we have to wait for a user to decide they're going to let me reboot their machine, or the grumbling that comes with forced reboots. So this is just win-win all the way around. So just in case you didn't quite catch the way Andy explained it, and I thought he did a good job, but I'll just try to explain it again. 4 times a year, January, April, July, October, you will get your very standard Patch Tuesday cumulative update, and your machine will reboot. So there's still 4 reboots a year. But then for the next 2 months, so February and March as an example, when Patch Tuesday rolls around, my machine will just take that cumulative update, apply it, and I'm good. No forced reboot. I have immediate protection against any vulnerabilities that were discovered in that month's patches, and away I keep going, keep working, stay productive. Pretty awesome stuff. And then the same happens in March, and then April rolls around, and yes, I do reboot that month. You may reboot for other reasons, of course, just because sometimes rebooting feels good. Other updates, maybe there's firmware updates, maybe there's a feature update, maybe you have an application that requires a reboot to install or update. You may still have to. It doesn't mean it's the end of updates, but the number one forced reboot is probably that monthly cumulative update on Patch Tuesday, and that now is diminished. So very exciting. This certainly does encourage organizations to be using all of the modern tools and all of the modern management techniques. To Andy's point, if you took a recently built Windows 11 machine, shipped with Windows 11, then VBS is turned on by default. If you then layered all of your management and your applications on using Windows Autopilot, obviously you maintain that, which is great. You have to use Windows Autopatch to configure Hotpatch policies. So you must be using that and not some old school patching technique or some third-party patching technique. You have to be at least using Autopatch in some way, shape, or form, which more or less involves Intune as well. So there is a lot of encouragement here to use the modern management practices to get to all of this goodness. But I'd argue the juice is certainly worth the squeeze here. This is such a security win, such a user experience win. This is a place you want to get to. This is in production. This is generally available. You can use this today. And by the way, if you're kind of scared, like, ooh, that kind of sounds bleeding edge, we've been doing this in Windows Server now for many years. That's where this technology came from, was pioneered in Windows Server. and then was brought to the client operating system as well. So not actually new technology, just new to the client OS. And then finally, you mentioned this as well, Andy. Today, general availabilities for x64 CPUs, those are Intel or AMD CPUs, the lion's share of what you're going to see in enterprise. But if you're starting to use some of these new Copilot Plus PCs that use Qualcomm silicon today, potentially other silicon vendors in the future with ARM64 chipsets, that's currently in public preview. I am recording this right now in daily driving a Surface Laptop 7 with the fantastic Snapdragon Elite X, whatever it's called, the new hotness. So I don't actually have Hotpatch today enabled from Microsoft. It is still in public preview. And there is one interesting caveat with that, and I went down this rabbit hole. Maybe listeners will be curious about this as well. There was a technology shipped in the Windows 10 days called CHPE, and it allowed developers to take code, application code bases that was mostly x64 code, and maybe refactor some of that code. Maybe it was the most demanding or most important or most frequently run code in that code base, and recompile just part of it to ARM native code. And so then you could have this hybrid executable that had some x64 code and some ARM64 code, and it would just use the emulator that's part of Windows to emulate the x64 code and then run the native code as much as possible. They moved to a different model in Windows 11. So this really is kind of a Windows 10 thing. And there were not a lot of Windows on ARM systems in Windows 10 anyways, and they weren't very good, to be honest. So you're likely not impacted by this. You don't have a lot of software that is compiled in this way. However, you do need to turn off CHPE support to enable Hotpatch on ARM64 devices. So if you're like, what is that? It was like an old way to make it easier for developers to port their apps to ARM, is the long story short. So there's better technology in Windows 11. And now that ARM64 is becoming such a popular platform on Windows with these Copilot Plus PCs, app developers are just refactoring all their code. They're fully recompiling their entire code base into ARM native code. And so this is, to be honest, not really an issue. But the documentation does state CHP will never be supported with Hotpatch. So you will have to enable that, and it's unlikely we'll ever go back and do all of the homework to make both of those work together. So probably not a big deal, but just something to be aware of if you're reviewing the documentation, especially if you're like me and running one of these new platforms and you're like, well, what does that mean? What would that impact me? Probably not much impact at all. So just wanted to share that because it is kind of an interesting little, what's that asterisk about? Why is this not on ARM64 yet? And what is this thing I'm going to have to disable when it does become generally available? So probably not a big deal, but yeah, you can certainly try it out today in public preview on ARM64, and GA should come shortly thereafter. But for the majority of enterprises who have almost none of these devices, if any, you have no roadblocks to prevent you from getting going with Windows Hotpatch today. Other than, like Andy and I both rattled off all of the requirements here, they do really encourage you to be using a lot of the modern management stack in practice.
Speaking of ARM64, I know you mentioned that you're on a Surface Laptop 7. I'm super excited because I finally got a device refresh with Microsoft, and I picked up the Surface Pro 11. And I've been using, the MacBook Pro M1 processor for a few years now. And I'm super excited to see how the Windows one works. I bought a Snapdragon PC for my wife probably last year, and she's had no complaints. So I do know that in enterprise, it's probably less common, but some of the benefits of like having that Snapdragon silicon, especially when it comes to battery life, is really like unbeatable. So I'm really curious. I know that you've been raving about it. Maybe at some point we'll kind of do like a review of like what it feels like to have that as a primary device. But I'm going to put it through the paces and see if there's anything that is going to be, slower or whatever, especially due to the emulation, how that affects things. But at least from what you've said, you haven't noticed any issues with it.
No, it is easily the best Windows laptop I have ever used. It is, to me, it's perfect. It is the perfect device. It is beautiful. incredible build quality, great screen, great battery life. The performance is out of this world. Like the thing is, you don't even know. You can give this to a muggle, a non-technical person, and unless they have some weird driver or something that's going to have an issue on ARM, they would never know or need to know. It just works, whatever you throw at it. It's a great device. These will gain a foothold in enterprise. It will happen because eventually these performance gains and battery life are going to be unavoidable. And as long as it can emulate your x64 code you've got for your line of business apps, and in most cases it should be able to, there's probably not a lot of roadblocks here, actually, I think. And I've been dabbling in Windows on ARM for years because I had a Surface Pro 9 with 5G that also had that Microsoft SQ3 processor, which was basically a rebadged earlier gen Snapdragon. And it didn't quite have the performance that these modern chips had, but I could just see that Windows on ARM was actually a thing. Like it's an impressive engineering feat. Anytime you can make an OS, which is such a complicated piece of hardware, run on an entirely different platform and mostly run pretty darn seamless, is pretty incredible achievement. And it did that. And I was just feeling like, man, if I could just get a performant CPU with this, it would be out of this world. And now that that's been delivered, and especially it doesn't feel like there's a performance impact from emulating 64 code. It's really incredible. So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox. This is not an ad, but it is a really, really great device. And I mean, I'm not the only one saying that. You can go read reviews anywhere, and the feedback is basically the same. Most people say these are the best Windows laptops ever shipped. And the goal is not, obviously they'd love to beat Apple in every single metric and every benchmark in every category, but just being in the ballpark is a win right now. When you can at least say, you know what, if it doesn't beat the M4 in every single benchmark, that's fine. Is it competitive? Yes. Is it competitive from a battery life perspective? Yes. Is it competitive from a standpoint of not having fans screaming and blasting hot air at my lap the whole time? Yes. It does all of those things. So now you have a true compete. And that's, again, we talk about the rising tide. We talk about competition being good for everyone. It's good for the PC industry to at least be in the ball game now.
Yeah.
With the amazing work, I mean, Apple's done a phenomenal job with their ARM CPUs. So it's exciting times.
It is. All right. Finally, I just wanted to mention, because this was not on my radar till Adam, you mentioned it in one of our chats, but Copilot has been around for a while, and Microsoft announced a new feature for Copilot, which is you can turn any topic into a virtual podcast. And so if you ask Copilot, it can generate a podcast for you, present it to you in audio form, and even let you chime in with your own thoughts as if you were on the podcast. And I think you said that you did generate like a podcast for this episode specifically on a Hotpatch, and I'll let you talk about that. But I just thought this was not on my radar. You said that you asked Copilot to make a podcast on Hotpatch because you were like, I'm just curious. And I was like, in my head, I was thinking, oh man, they're gonna put us out of business here. Not that we make any money from this show, but I'm just saying, like, maybe people won't want to listen to us anymore, and they're gonna want to just make a virtual podcast, which, like, again, I think when it comes to AI, it's just one of those things. It's like, well, if you want audio on just the nuts and bolts of like a specific topic, and again, I haven't heard, so I want your feedback on, like, I know you listen to the podcast generated by Copilot, but maybe you just want like the nuts and bolts of a specific topic. Great, they can generate that. But what they can't generate, kind of the same thing with anything, is that they can't generate stuff from like personal experience, anecdotes, things that we have learned over the years from talking to hundreds of different customers, issues that we've come up with in our own experience. So, it has its place, I believe. I think that, in my opinion, we're still going to be relevant. Hopefully, listeners, continue to listen to us if you find us valuable. Otherwise, you have Copilot to generate yourself a virtual one. Again, this is not anything, I think, capability wise, it's not like super new, because that AI version has kind of permutated into other things like Spotify Wrapped and so on and so forth. But yeah, I'll let you, Adam, give your experience on like what the podcast actually sounded like, how good it was, and yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
There's this concept in visual mediums called the uncanny valley, and it's where as you create photorealistic or near photorealistic video or images, the uncanny valley is this concept that there's still something missing. Like there's still that spark of humanity that it's just not quite there. And it makes it almost unsettling. The way, like, if you've ever seen the Polar Express movie, there's something off about the way all the characters look. Like they look dead inside in a way. It's hard to explain. Same in Madden football. Like the players look so realistic, but there's just not that spark of life that you need. And in a way, it's like that. I dabbled with this feature. It's in preview currently. We announced it at Microsoft's 50th anniversary celebration on April 4th. And basically the way it works is you fire up the Copilot app, the consumer app, to be clear, and you can just say or type Copilot, generate or create a podcast for X minutes long on this subject. And then it'll say, okay, I'll work on it and I'll send you a notification when it's ready. And you'll get a push notification. It'll take you to that home screen where it's got kind of the different things you can tap on or different ideas. One of them will be the podcast you created. And it's really pretty incredible from the sense of there will be two hosts generally. So they'll go back and forth. There's like a dynamic where they'll bounce off each other. The hosts will speed up, slow down, take breaths like you hear us do because we are real. And it's really unsettling in a way because it's so good. But it never occurred to me like, oh, this is going to put me out of a job. Like, because it's so far off from that. But I asked about Hotpatch and I told it to make me a 15-minute podcast. Well, first off, it ignored my request for 15 minutes. It was like 3 minutes long. So there's that. I don't know if that's a bug or what. I can't make a longer one for me right now. It keeps giving me 3-minute podcasts, which is not really what I'm looking for. So there's that. It's in preview, to be fair. Audio quality is great. The dynamics great. The hosts are actually very interesting. Like you don't get kind of that weird AI response where like it doesn't really know what it's talking about. Like it can fool you. It really sounds like, oh, they really know what they're talking about. There's a little back and forth. And even when I talked about Hotpatch, one of the hosts was kind of like taking the position of they were skeptical. Like, is this really possible? Can this really work? And does this create new issues? Does this open us up to new vulnerabilities because we're not rebooting? And so there was actually a little bit of an interesting discussion there about like, well, if we don't reboot, what does that put us at additional risk for? So we're solving one challenge, but are we opening the door to another one? It was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if it can back that up with why it thinks that, but it was thought-provoking if nothing else. So it's in preview. If you're not a Copilot Pro subscriber, I think you're limited to how many you can generate at any one time, but it is freely available to everyone. I would be curious to hear listener feedback on what you think about it. And certainly anyone can go try it. It has promise. And at the end of the day, Andy, as you talked about, maybe not put us out of a job, but it can augment what we do. It could even be helpful for us. Like, hey, we're going to talk about this weekend. If I could have Copilot generate a podcast and I could listen to it, just to kind of get ideas on how to talk about it. And if it might not have all the right answers, all the information may not be perfectly right, but it's going to be close enough to help me have a better conversation about it. Or you just think about all that time we spend in the car, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, Andy, I know you do too. But what if you could be like, okay, I'm going to go be driving for, I got to drive to the next town over to go to a doctor's appointment. It's going to be a 30-minute drive because I'm going downtown or whatever. I really would need to learn this week. Mm-hmm. And you could say, hey, Copilot, generate a podcast about this. And then you've got it like queued up. And so you are almost managing your learning to exactly what you need. Even if it's not perfect, if it's pretty good, still pretty good for that kind of circumstance. So I don't see it as, again, not putting us out of a job, but like on-demand podcasts on a particular subject that are something you can, depending on how specific you prompt, can really dial in. There's something there. And just being able to get information in an audio format, that's been kind of this next hurdle. There's so much to read on the internet if we only had time to read it. But we often have times where we're not available to read, but we could listen. If we can get it in that format, that's helpful. And I think that's kind of what this is trying to do. And I love the idea. So it's pretty cool. Definitely go try it out. Again, be patient. It is in preview. It's not in full production. I even just said full transparency, like it's ignoring my request for how long to make the show. And it's making pretty short ones right now. But if I could get it to do a 15-minute one, a 20-minute one, I'm really curious in trying that out. So I continue to kind of dabble with it myself and, we can maybe revisit this in the future as it moves into production and how it's working out.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information, as well as the links to the articles and documentation that we used for the show, will be in the show notes as well. Reach out to us, contact us if you have any ideas or comments, questions about the show. Our email will be there. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.